Vaccines, employment benefits, and business support don't come cheap. It's been over a year of massive spending by our governments to keep us afloat in the midst of a global pandemic. The result? Record debts and soaring deficits. And the billion-dollar question is, who is going to pay for it? Joining us now with their thoughts in Kitchener, Tammy Schirle, professor of economics at Wilfred Laurier University, and in Toronto, in Ontario's capital city, are economist Jeff Rubin, author of The Expandables: How the Middle Class Got Screwed by Globalization, and April Franco, associate professor of economics at U of T, with a cross appointment to the economic analysis and policy area at Rotman School of Management. It's very nice to meet all of you. Welcome. I said it was a billion-dollar question, but I think it's probably more accurate to call it a trillion-dollar question. To help set our discussion for tonight, let's take a look at some of the numbers that came out of the province's $186 billion 2021 budget that was recently tabled by Finance Minister Peter Bethlenflawy. Ontario saw a record $38.5 billion deficit through 2020. The ministry forecasts a deficit of about $33.1 billion for the 2021-22 fiscal year. Ontario's economy shrunk by about 5.7% over the last year, and it will take at least until 2029 for Ontario to balance the books, and that's at least. I wanted to get from all of you, when you see those numbers and those scenarios, what comes to mind? Jeff, I'll start with you.
Well, you mentioned Ontario. Ontario's gone relatively unscathed compared to Ottawa. We've seen the federal deficit explode by 10 times pre-COVID levels. There's been a over 50% increase in public debt. The key point that I think people have to realize is that while there's a cyclical component to this deficit, while some of these programs, spending programs, will be discontinued, the enormity of this deficit means that we will not be able to grow ourselves out of it, that it will take very, very significant fiscal action. And no matter who is in power after the election, we're facing huge spending cuts and we're facing huge tax increases. That's a given. On whose shoulders those tax increases are going to be placed, well, that's to be determined, and I guess that's the choice to be made.
Tammy, it's interesting what Jeff just said, because I don't know if I've heard any politician mention taxes, but I wanted to get your reaction to those numbers.
So I think there's two really important points here, and I think I might differ from some others. The first is that we have to make a clear distinction between provincial debt and federal debt. From all estimates I've seen, the federal debt is quite sustainable, and I don't think there's any really big concerns there yet. But provincially, our debt was a problem before this pandemic hit us. We were running into huge problems with unsustainable debt. And so that's the bigger concern moving forward. The other point is that the deficits that we see this year and over the next couple of years, this isn't just going on a splurge. This is looking at over 1 million people in Ontario who lost their jobs last spring, and they needed support for that. And that's the kind of thing that we're carrying forward. And that's very different when we think about lost tax revenues and the spending, as opposed to just something we'd like to do.
April, this has been called a once-in-a-lifetime event, and when it comes to the government, it's kind of they have to think about the now, and thinking about the future maybe not the priority. I'm not saying that's what is how it should be, but when you look at those numbers, what goes through your mind?
Well, there's a couple points. First, I want to point out that governments can borrow at a much cheaper rate than individuals can. So anytime the government borrows, it's borrowing at an interest rate that is significantly lower than what individuals can do. And so that means that, the government is the one that needs to borrow when we have these cataclysmic events that occur. In terms of getting out of the debt, one thing that we know as economists that we can get out of this debt is because we have economic growth. As long as we can produce, entrepreneurs can come in and come up with those great new ideas and grow, that's how we're going to get out of this.
We're
and
going,
that's one of the
We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But Jeff, when you look around the
If I
world,
could just
yeah,
interject, 'cause you said we could challenge what each other says.
sure.
I very much would challenge the notion that the federal deficit is anywhere close, remotely close to being sustainable. It's only sustainable if the Bank of Canada continues to buy $4 billion of bonds every week and $350 billion worth of debt every year. But many people, particularly those who come from a capital markets background, and I spent the better part of 20 years being the chief economist of an investment bank in Canada, where I would go around the world trying to place these bonds. If the Bank of Canada stops doing that, this federal deficit is unsustainable. And the people who are going to feel that the most are people who will have to be renegotiating their mortgage rate.
But what is the choice for the government?
What is the choice for the government? As I said, you can't grow your way out of this deficit. We're back where Paul Martin was in the mid 1990s. There's going to have to be some very tough fiscal action, spending cuts and tax increases. And then the question becomes, who's going to bear the burden of this? When it comes to devising trade policies, the middle class is irrelevant. But when it comes to paying down huge deficits, the middle class is always uppermost in the government's minds. It's middle class households who are going to bear this burden unless we choose to place it on other people's shoulders. Chrystia Freeland wrote a book on plutocrats. Let's see if she follows through with that as the finance minister and places some of the burden on them. Because you know what? The 1%, the Sobeys, the Westons, they've weathered this pandemic very well. Sales in pharmacies, sales in grocery stores have been soaring. Let them bear some of this burden so that it doesn't singularly have to fall on the shoulders of Canada's dwindling middle class.
Well, Jeff, since you brought this up, millions of Canadians have lost their jobs since the pandemic began, but Canada's 44 billionaires increased their wealth by almost $63.5 billion. The charity Oxfam estimates this would be enough to give every one of the 3.8 million poorest people in Canada a check for $16,823. April, should billionaires be made to pay for their fair share?
So, I think that there is some rationale behind making sure that the burden is shared a little bit more evenly. But there is always a problem with that, with taxes. Anytime you try and tax somebody who is wealthy, who has income that can be moved from one jurisdiction to another, you have to worry about them doing exactly that. So, money is fungible. You can move it across borders. It's really easy. People with income who earn their income from labor, that is a different piece. It might be harder for you to move your work to a jurisdiction that has a lower tax rate. And so I do think that we have to be a little bit cognizant of these issues. And so while, what Jeff is pointing out is an important piece, we also have to worry about making sure that we are creating a tax system that will actually create taxes by not creating one where people want to move so that they can escape the taxes.
Let me push back on this a little bit. I'll use the example of Amazon. We know that through the pandemic, Jeff Bezos has become very, very wealthy. In the GTA, the Amazon warehouse, I think, was responsible for maybe 600 COVID cases. One of the things that we've been hearing throughout the pandemic is that Ontarians need sick days. So could there be, we keep talking about there is no wealth without health. This pandemic has taught us that there is no health without wealth. Could there be a way maybe to legislate companies like Amazon who finesse their way through paying taxes, maybe make them pay for sick days? That way they're contributing to the economy in a way that it doesn't have a ripple effects throughout the province. What do you think about that, April?
So I think that that's an interesting, and I think one that's not, one that's viable. in the following sense. The Amazon workers that are working here in Canada that are at the warehouse, those guys we can actually control, and their work is specifically for this area. In other words, if Amazon were to move that warehouse to another jurisdiction where they didn't have those sick days, well, they couldn't deliver it to us. And so the benefit, so moving that is really costly for Amazon. So I think that that's one place where we could actually see something like that.
And Tammy, what do you think?
Well, I think it's important to think that there's two parts to this. There's the job protection that comes with being able to take sick leave, and then there's being able to take that sick leave with pay. Right now, the federal government is offering some support in that regard, but it's really hard if you're just needing to take a day or two off. Can we get employers to pay for that? Certainly. Other jurisdictions do that. It's certainly feasible to do. I think that is one thing that we should consider more. There are general studies showing that when you offer paid sick leave, people will use it well. It reduces rates of, flu in workplaces and other such things, and it could certainly be important in the future.
Jeff, when we do talk about how Canada is faring globally, how does Canada's economy in terms of where we stand with our debt and deficits compare to other countries?
Look, this is a universal problem, but proportionally speaking, in terms of both the deficit and the borrowing requirements, no one comes close to us in the G7. Now, what viewers have to understand is that we have not seen the market impact of all of this borrowing, because the Bank of Canada has basically financed this deficit. They've increased their holdings of Government of Canada bonds to over 40% of the entire market. Should they stop doing this, we would see a very dramatic rise in bond yields, the same bond yields that mortgage rates are priced off. Thank God I locked in to a 5-year fixed term mortgage at below 2% in September, because if the Bank of Canada stops buying all of these bonds, bond yields and mortgage rates could well be a multiple of what they are. And that's in the past what the cost of running these huge fiscal deficits is. Borrowing rates skyrocket. And not just the federal government's borrowing rates, your borrowing rates. Do you want to continue to bet home ownership on the Bank of Canada continuing to do something that they've never done before? And I would argue what the Bank of Canada is doing is ultimately unsustainable. And when that becomes unsustainable, mortgage holders are going to recognize that in a hurry. If the Bank of Canada is really serious about cooling off the housing market, all they got to do is stop buying $4 billion worth of bonds every week, and rising mortgage rates will do the job. Of course, if Tiff Macklem did that, he'd probably get fired.
April,
So
when you look, go ahead. Yeah.
Step in this moment there. One thing that I think is really important, Jeff, is that we're not talking about continuing this kind of borrowing for years. We're talking about this being a once in a lifetime event where we have to get into this position, which is not great for us. And you're right that it's not going to be great for our kids either, but this is the only way that we could get out of this pandemic.
But April, this isn't a one-time. If the deficit magically disappeared next year, then the Bank of Canada wouldn't have to be buying $4 billion worth of bonds a week. The problem is, as I said at the beginning, we can't just grow our way out of this deficit. This deficit is going to be here for a while. And during that time, unless we want to have 3 times the interest rates that we currently have, this deficit is going to continue to have to be financed by the Bank of Canada. And I suspect that this will not end well for either Tiff Macklem or the Bank of Canada. But more importantly, this won't end well ultimately for homeowners, because they will ultimately bear the financial burden of all of this government borrowing.
Vaccines have been said to be the game changer and maybe something that will make the pandemic go away. Truth be told, we don't know when this pandemic is going to go away. We don't know what we're going to need in 6 months, if we're going to need booster shots, et cetera. Tammy, I know you wanted to weigh in on this.
Well, certainly we don't know exactly where things are going. When we think about interest rates and everything else, all these different moving parts, I haven't seen good reason to think that we're heading back into the 1990s. Things look very different today than they did then. And when it comes to employment recovering, we expect that once those vaccines are rolled out, people can get back to work. In things like accommodation and food services, we tend to think of employment there as being fairly elastic in the sense that people are quickly laid off, but those businesses quickly bounce back as well. I'm a bit more concerned about things like arts and entertainment, where customers have found other things to do. They've given up their season tickets. They might not come back to those businesses as quickly. And so we're going to have to wait and see how that's going. I think a lot of those groups are going to have to restructure, and a lot of those workers are going to be looking for something new to do.
We're going to touch on that in just a moment, but I wanted to read you all this, something from the Economist, and this was from March 25th. And they write, COVID-19 means there is more red ink to come. A new era of sovereign debt management could be about to begin. What this period may bring is not yet clear. The post-pandemic debt regime might resemble that of the immediate post-war era. The trials of this crisis could inspire a new wave of investment in technology and infrastructure, leading to fierce competition for available savings and higher government borrowing costs. It's been said, never waste a good crisis. Who here is optimistic about a new wave of investment in technology and infrastructure?
Oh, absolutely. I think that this is going to be the big thing. The question is, it's hard for us at this point in time to really have a sense of what that invention or innovation is going to be. I think that we're going to see a lot more quick tests for all sorts of things, not just the COVID-19, but for a lot of things, so that now we are protecting workers as they walk through the door and making sure that nobody is getting sick. So I think that that's going to be one thing. And I think the other thing is we've already seen with technology like Zoom and Skype and, how many people are talking to their friends and family every day on these systems. And so I think we're going to see a great amount of innovation here.
And Tammy, in what ways could this crisis inspire new ways of approaching debt?
In terms of debt, I think the one thing that we need to be most concerned about is what happens with personal income tax revenues in the near future and how that's going to move forward. In terms of taking on debt, I think we've seen two groups over this past year. There's, families like mine that have been staying at home and not spending as much. We have some pent-up savings that need somewhere to go. And then there's the group of people who were laid off for large parts of the year, and they've had good income support that's kept them going. Some of them have been able to reduce their debt loads, and that might be some advantage in moving forward as well.
You're all economists. Yes, go ahead, Jeff.
Something I'd just like to amplify that Tammy pointed out that I think is very important, and I'd be very optimistic about, the personal savings rate. The personal savings rate in Canada, and it'd be the same in the US, is about 4 times what it normally would be. That's not because people didn't want to spend. That's because people couldn't spend. What you're seeing in the stock market right now is a huge shift of funds out of tech stocks into the so-called cyclicals. There's going to be an enormous surge in consumer demand when we reopen the economy. Now, granted, that's going to be tied to the pace of inoculation, but in the US, where things are opening up, we're seeing that people are lined up outside of Nordstrom Rack to go shopping because they haven't bought clothes in a year. So I think we're all going to be pleasantly surprised by the strength of the consumer rebound, because there is an incredible amount of pent-up demand, whether it's to go to a theater or to buy clothes or to go to a restaurant. And I think we're going to find that consumption's very, very strong, stronger than probably most people initially suspect right now.
Just to build on what Jeff said, April, once we do get out and we start spending, and once that's out of our system, to what degree can that stave off economic decline?
I think we are going to be back. So there's been a lot of work recently trying to understand what the rebound is going to be. Is it going to be V-shaped or is it going to be more slow? And I think that my expectation is that we'll see a much more V-shaped response, that we're going to see people come back and it's going to be back to what levels that we've seen in the past very quickly. So, I think that that's going to be what's going to drive a lot of this.
Tammy, you mentioned the entertainment sector, the service sector. To what extent can those who lost all those jobs in the service sector, restaurants and the arts and entertainment bounce back after this pandemic?
Well, that's to be seen. I think there's different groups here. So you see a lot of industries that are operating at normal levels. They might be operating differently, working out of people's homes and such, but they're working and they're fine. Things like restaurants, your hospitality and tourism, they're going to be struggling for a little while to bounce back, but I think they can bounce back quickly. We've seen that in the past. We've seen that in the data over the past year. I'm very optimistic they're going to make it back very quickly. There's these pockets, though, of industries and different groups of people where we think they're going to struggle a little bit more.
Like what?
I'd expect a little bit more struggle in the arts and entertainment. We're very concerned that there's pockets of single moms out there who had to give up on working in the past year. We're concerned also that we've seen some preliminary evidence of more people with more seniority in their companies. They haven't gotten recalled to work as quickly as some of their junior counterparts. And so we're a bit concerned about long-term joblessness in those groups. So I think going forward, I'm optimistic for the big picture in terms of everyone getting back to work quickly, including in hospitality and tourism. But there's these pockets of people we're going to have to watch out for.
And Jeff, we've been I think before we were taping, we were talking about how the concern for the younger generation and how they're going to be shouldered with this debt. You've mentioned the middle class. But something that we've been talking about on the show a lot is that if we found any silver linings, I think the pandemic has shown the inequality in our society. But do you see any silver linings? Will workers have jobs? Maybe if we can address protectionism. What are your thoughts?
Yes, I do. It's an ironic one, but it's a silver lining nevertheless. History is showing that pandemics, going back to the bubonic plague, Spanish flu, in their wake, wages have always risen. Now, wages rose after pandemics simply because of the physical decimation of the labor force. There were less peasants, less workers available, so hence the price of labor rose. I think we're also going to see wages rise, not because, hopefully, of the physical decimation of the labor force, but trade policies have changed. Trade policies that have been immiserizing to the middle class in Canada and the United States and the UK have changed. And, I haven't noticed Joe Biden take off any of the tariffs that Donald Trump slapped on China. I think this is a different trading regime. I think the pandemic has dealt a mortal blow to global supply chains and globalization. And I think the repatriation of long lost middle class manufacturing jobs is going to see wages grow. So that in the wake of this pandemic, like in past pandemics, we're going to see a welcome rise in wages.
We have about 5 minutes.
I think silver lining.
We have about 5 minutes, and there's a few more questions I want to get through with all of you. You're all economists. If we look at some basic economic theories, I'd like to get your thoughts on where these numbers are heading with interest rates, inflation rates, and unemployment rates. Tammy, I'll start with you. Unemployment rates.
So right now in Ontario, there's about 300,000 or more people who should be working who aren't. And we have over 800,000 people using employment insurance right now. So that gives you a sense of the scale of the existing problem as it is right now and what we have going forward. I think that can recover fairly quickly, but like I said, we have to watch out for these pockets of people. We have young people trying to start careers. We have new moms trying to make their way back into the labor market. And then all of these folks who have been laid off for a large part of the past year trying to make their way back in. It's going to take a little bit of time. optimistic that we're going to get there quickly. But an important thing here is recognizing that this is not like past recessions. Past recessions, we really focused on the goods market. We'd throw stimulus spending at construction and manufacturing, worrying about those jobs. This recession is about the service sector, and that takes a very different approach.
And Tammy, April, inflation rates.
So, I don't think the inflation rate is going to go up. I think, the central banks around the world are very well versed in how to manage that. And so I don't expect it to go up dramatically, and I think that for the same reason that we're not seeing interest rates going up. And even if, as my colleague said, interest rates could be 3 times what they are now, think about what that is. When I was in graduate school, my interest rate on my student loan was in the double digits. 3 times what the interest rate is now is like 6%. That's not even close. So, we have been there. And I do think that the central banks are very well versed in how to manage this.
Well, you led me right to Jeff. Jeff, interest rates, your thoughts?
Well, if interest rates are 5 or 6%, there are going to be hundreds of thousands of Canadians who aren't going to be able to afford their home. And as I said at the beginning, record low interest rates and record high deficits is a marriage that cannot last. I would urge any viewer who has not yet locked in to a fixed term mortgage to do so now, because we are not growing our way out of these deficits, and the Bank of Canada will not be able to indefinitely buy $4 billion worth of bonds every week. So that's my takeaway. Lock in now and immunize yourself from what, unfortunately, the government of Canada will not be able to do, which is ultimately soaring public debt charges.
I locked in a year ago. And Tammy, moving forward, would protectionism be a good thing for Canada and Ontario's economy?
So I'll start by giving a shout out to my colleagues at the Finances of the Nation. Everyone should check out their estimates on debt and debt sustainability. I think that's a useful site. When it comes to protectionism, that's not a winner in the long run. We can see some short-term gains within pockets of industries that are protected, but in the long run, that's going to cost everyone in Canada even more. And so I tend not to encourage people to go down that road.
April, small businesses have really struggled this past year. If they are still here, there's very few of them. How can the small business sector move forward?
I think that what we've learned is being able to pivot and really find something that customers are willing and able to use, even when we are stuck all locked at home, right? So a lot of restaurants, the ones that have been very successful, have pivoted to delivery, to these, sort of meal kits kind of things. And they have still managed. One thing that I think is going to be very interesting moving forward is whether they're going to pivot back to the restaurant full service. I mean, I think many of us who have been stuck at home are thinking, of course I want full service. Like, I don't want somebody else to do my dishes. I don't care about being at my home in the 4 walls that we've all been in. But I do think that, being able to pivot, because the restaurants, a lot of these restaurants rent huge spaces with lots and lots of tables, and have to have the staff, the busboys, the waiters, the hostess, all of those people. And what I think we're realizing is that there is another way of doing this that's a little bit cheaper and, can give them a little bit more of the profits as well. Now, how do we do that? I don't know. We'll see what happens in the future. But I do think that there's a lot going on there.
I'm going to give you all 10 seconds each for the next question, and then we need to wrap up. If you were in charge, give me one fiscal policy you would put in place to help create a robust and sustainable economy moving forward. Jeff, 10 seconds.
Impose an inheritance tax on estates over $5 million and make all of capital gains inclusive, taxable, no tax on home ownership.
And Tammy?
We need childcare infrastructure and the proper spaces being built. That's going to get parents back to work and paying more taxes again.
And April?
Childcare. Being able to go out and work is really important, and we've already seen that this has been so unequal in terms of women, the effect on women and the effect on people who have small children at home. Not having childcare and not offering it to everyone is really important.
Big thank you to all of you. I feel a lot smarter after speaking to you for this past half hour. Thank you very much for your insights. We really do appreciate you taking the time for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.